Welcome to the wonderful world of homeschooling. I suspect that there are many of you out there that haven't actually made the decision whether or not you're going to homeschool. And I'm hoping that your being here tonight will help you make that decision. We'll see if we can do that. I would like to encourage you to prayerfully consider this. I would encourage you that there will be times that it will be very important that you understand that God is behind you on this and that this was what He wanted you to do. And then the next thing I would encourage you to do would be to get your house in order. Now, while it's a good idea to organize your home, like get your things in order so that you can find things and you don't have to spend so much time looking for things, that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm really more talking about is the matter of discipline, that your children understand what the authority structure is, that they understand who the boss is. You know, it's kind of hard when you're trying to homeschool a child and you say, well, Johnny, you need to do a grammar lesson. And Johnny says, I don't want to do a grammar lesson. If Johnny doesn't understand that Mom is the boss, then you're going to get it's going to be a lot harder for you to homeschool. The next thing I would encourage you to do is to read some books about homeschooling. There's a lot of stuff out there that's available that can help you get a grasp on this whole idea of homeschooling. Some of those books I would encourage you to read would be like the How and Why of Homeschooling by Dr. Ray Ballman, and perhaps that could help you make this decision. And then there's The Survivor's Guide to Homeschooling. This is kind of a fun book to read. It's by Lou Ann Shackelford. Another one that I like is When Homeschooling Gets Tough by Diana Johnson. I personally think it needs to be renamed. You need to read this book. It's more like what to do to keep homeschooling from getting tough. What you're going to need to do is to choose an approach to education. So I'm going to explain some of the different choices that we have. We have traditional textbooks. These are like the ones that are hardcover books. You read the chapter and then you answer the questions at the end of the chapter. A lot of the people that I know in the homeschooling community will use Bob Jones, Becca, Rod and Staff. These are different types of traditional textbooks. Another approach would be the consumable workbooks. This is where you take basically the same information that you have in a traditional textbook, but you divide it into what they call 10 paces. They're very much self-directed. You take the test out of the middle of the book, the workbook, you give it to the child, and the child can pretty much do it at his own pace. And when they get through with the workbook, you give them the test. If they do well enough on the test, then they go on to the next workbook. Some of the consumable workbooks that they have would be like Alpha Omega, ACE, the Accelerated Christian Education. Another approach would be computer assisted, and this would be basically a lot the same that you have in your traditional textbooks or in your consumable workbooks, except that it's on a computer. Those are kind of nice sometimes because one of the things I really like about the computer assisted courses is that they grade themselves. Mom does not have to do that. There are a lot of different approaches. Now I want you to understand that I'm just going to give you a sampling because there's really a lot of, I don't have time to tell you about all the different nuances of the different approaches and stuff, but you'll hear a lot in the homeschool community about unit studies. Now, these are really pretty different from the way most of us were educated. Basically, I like to explain a unit study by, well, for example, KONOS is a unit study program. Everything that in a unit study is based around the topic, the unit. And in KONOS, the units are based on character qualities. And so you take a character quality and then everything points to that character quality. For example, I was encouraged to study attentiveness as the first character quality because if a child can't be attentive, they can't learn anything. So in attentiveness, you work with your ears and your eyes. And so in science, you have to listen and you have to look. So you study the ears and the eyes. When we studied the eyes, we got a rabbit's eyeball and we dissected it, and it was really very interesting. It was not much fun to touch, but nobody wanted to touch it, but it was interesting. And with the ears, you know, we drew all the parts of the ears and showed how it worked and everything like that. These are some of the things to consider when you are trying to choose an approach to education. The first one is what you can handle. For example, do you have a baby in your house? Then you're going to have to realize that a whole lot of teacher-intensive programs or classes are going to be kind of hard for you to do because you're going to have to be available to take care of that baby. And another is your level of confidence. The unit studies sound like a lot of fun to a lot of people, but then they get real nervous. In fact, honestly, I don't usually encourage people to do unit studies their first year because it is just so different from anything that they've ever done before. Now, if you're interested in unit studies, one of the fun things you can do is more traditional type stuff, Monday through Thursday, and then take Friday to do unit studies and kind of get your feet wet and find out what it's like. Another thing to consider is the amount of money you have available. Years ago, I heard that if a child is ready to read, then it doesn't matter what phonics program you use. And so I took that to heart and I bought a $15 phonics program and my children learned to read. Now eventually I did have to buy some little readers to go along with it, so it ended up being about $60. But you know, I know that there's a $300 or $350 phonics program out there, and I know it has a lot more bells and whistles than anything I ever used, but you know, I couldn't afford that. But my children learned to read just as well. Another thing you might think about is the number of children that you have and the spread of their ages. For example, I had 4 children in 5 years, and so my children were very close together, so we were able to do a lot of things together. And I have some friends that have children. They have 3 children that are 15 years apart. Well, it's a lot harder to do things all together with a 5-year-old and a 15-year-old. I really encourage people to do some of those classes that you can do together. There's not anything that says that you have to do Texas history in the 7th grade for homeschool. And so you can do Texas history when you have a 4th grader and a 7th grader and a 9th grader. And maybe the 9th grader has to write a paper on something, on what you studied that day, and then the 7th grader ends up writing a paragraph, and then the 4th grader draws a picture or something like that. So you can do some of that together. I just could not manage to do a full separate course of study for all of my kids at the same time, at different levels. And honestly, I had twins, but I really had 4 different levels to work with. And another thing to consider is learning styles. Now, you'll hear a lot about learning styles in the homeschool community, and I like to divide it into the kinesthetic learner, the one who learns most by doing things, the visual learner, the one who learns most by seeing things, and then the auditory learner, the one who learns most by hearing. It helps to know these things, especially when your child runs into some problems, and it'll help you to be able to direct them in a certain direction. In my situation, I covered all those bases. And so for me, I ended up realizing that a lot of times it was not the kind of learner I had, but sometimes it was what was my teaching style. And I'll just tell you that if you don't like messes, you're going to have a whole lot harder time doing kinesthetic projects. I know one time we were studying anger, and we built a volcano. And my kids loved setting off the volcano. And so every time people would come over, we would set off the volcano, and then we had to clean up the mess. But I personally think that if you cover all of the senses, the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic, then you will be able to get through to each one of those kids. The big thing is where it comes down to, if they're having problems, say, with math, and you've got a visual learner, then you can say, okay, I know that if I can make this visual, I can use manipulatives, and this child will be able to see these things, then we'll be able to get past this problem, and that'll help a lot.